Hello.
Our story begins months before the beginning of the Clone Wars, a war that no one in the galaxy would ever be able to predict. Despite the unrest within the Republic, the galaxy itself was thriving. This was heavily in part to the expansion of the Jedi Order during the years of the High Republic. 100,000 Jedi now filled the galaxy, inhabitants of enclaves, outposts, training grounds, monasteries, temples, and communities. The Jedi Order saw so much change in the previous 300 years of existence, but this era was heralded in by the spiritual leader of the Jedi Order. Master Yoda, while spending most of his time on Coruscant, was responsible for all this wondrous change. The Jedi Master adored his order, and it was his decisions that brought forth the rise of the Jedi. Due to the Sith being gone for so long and the Nile ruling over the Outer Rim, Yoda believed it was time the Jedi made a change. It followed the incidents of the Starlight Beacon and the attack of the Great Republic Fair. These moments in history set the precedent of change for both the Jedi and the Republic. The Galactic Republic obviously moved away from the Outer Rim, and slowly but surely fell down the rabbit hole of corruption and greed. The Jedi, on the other hand, decided that instead of cowering away, they would hold their title as Knights of the Republic, and they moved out. The Order spread itself out so much that Jedi Way Seekers started bringing new and young members into the Order. As Yoda, Yarel Poof, and Oberyn Ceases believed, the Jedi shouldn't withhold their members due to a midichlorian count. If they truly wanted to be an open and accepting sect, then they needed to approve anyone willing to learn, or attempt to try and to bring new members into their order and try from there. So as the heroes of the era moved out to fight off the Nile, the Jedi expanded. So much so that within the span of a decade, they required more locations. Yoda moved the Jedi into new outposts across Coruscant, thanks in part to the Senate at the time. The relationship between the Jedi and the Senate was still tight. As the years went by, it lost how close-knit it once was. Yoda instated new rules about the two Jedi going out to do their missions together, but he also pumped up the amount of Jedi funneling into the Order. Initially, it seemed like it was a bad thing to do. Many children below the original required M-count minimum struggled to keep pace with typical Jedi targets. This led to frustrated instructors and upset students. Yoda found ways to counter this. Initially, it was by splitting up more talented students, but that was seen as wrong. So what they ended up doing was making Jedi progression more accepting of students skipping grades and classes. Separating exceptional students was harsh for the non-exceptional students, so Jedi that progressed and exceeded expectations were sent to classes above them. It firstly added a benefit to being naturally talented, but it also offered the incentive for struggling students to push themselves more so that they could achieve more. What the Jedi Council found, long before the defeat of the Nile, is that as these Jedi became adults, they went out to the galaxy to help. They, just like everyone else trained from birth, were just like them. Some of them became priests or priestesses, but a majority of them filled the normal ranks of Jedi Knights and Masters. What was the most interesting part is that at later points in their lives, the struggling younglings would become over-accomplishing Knights and Masters. They all strived to make up for what they lacked. Sure, having a keen sense of the Force was a strong ally, but the Order thrived off of individuals who cared about the people of the galaxy. But the Senate at one point decided that they weren't going to allow the Jedi to just have more free space on Coruscant. The temple was more than enough for them, so the Order expanded, and as the decades turned into centuries, the galaxy changed, and the Jedi evolved. Yoda had a hard time with keeping up with the changes, but he started eliciting more power to other Jedi. The main branch of the Jedi Council was on Coruscant, but with the additional Jedi locations sprouting up galaxy-wide, Yoda was able to delegate powers to Jedi Elders, and even eventually, as the Order pushed past 40,000 members, give the power of Grand Master to others. Yoda was transformed into a spiritual ambassador for the Jedi Order. He did teach students on Coruscant, but only the most gifted. There wasn't favoritism, but the elements of assisting the most gifted students with the most gifted teachers was certainly common. But this didn't mean everyone with special talents was on Coruscant. Due to the mass expansion of the Jedi, after the first 50 or so years, the Order was able to solely lead an effort into the Outer Rim. By this point, they had around 20,000 members. When the Order hit 40,000 members, they had secured a good half of the Outer Rim. Tragically, these numbers would have been drastically inflated, but the fight with the Nile became a righteous crusade, one backed by every Jedi within the Order. They were fighting to save the people of the Outer Rim, and the Jedi-Nile conflict escalated. If it hadn't been for the war, the Jedi would have likely had 7,000 or 8,000 more members, but that was the cost of war. After 100 years of expansion, the Jedi crossed the 50,000 member mark, and they were able to drive the Nile into extinction. The reason it took so long, which the war lasted for the longer part of 80 years, is because the Outer Rim transformed during the conflict. Initially the struggle was Jedi and Nile, but eventually the crime families, which were relatively small, rose to aid the Nile. In their mind, their aiding of the Nile would push the Jedi from the Outer Rim and weaken Marchion Ro so that his Nile could be exterminated. That obviously didn't happen, and the Jedi stormed the Outer Rim. Accessing the Outer Rim changed everything for the continuously expanding Order. They did have to slow down how many members they were allowing into their ranks, but a solid number of the next 50,000 or so Jedi would come from the Mid-Rim and Outer Rim. Old temples would be rebuilt, and new locations continued to pop up. The most packed location of Jedi in the galaxy was at Coruscant with 5,000 members, and the Jedi High Council with the spiritual leader of the Order. The second most filled locations were at Tython with 2,600 members present, and the monastery on Ashes Ri with 2,200 members. While it might seem like these individual locations were too widespread, they weren't. Most of the time, the Jedi would take over a sector. For example, on Yavin, there were multiple moons and planets. The Jedi Council of that sector would split up its resources. There'd be a temple, training ground, monastery, enclave, and maybe even an outpost. All of these would be filled up with, say, 5,000 or 6,000 Jedi, and this was repeated galaxy-wide. Though the most important addition to this expansion for the Jedi was their outposts. These were across the galaxy, a majority of which in the Outer Rim. Only fully trained Jedi Knights and Masters operated on these outposts. This was because, due to the expansion, many experienced Jedi Masters would train 2 or 3 Padawans at the same time. It was just beneficial for the growth of Padawans inside the Order. So for Jedi at these outposts, they acted as a security detail, in a way. They were set up on struggling worlds so the Jedi could work together to build up the broken systems and communities of people across star systems and planets. It was the best way to consolidate their effort. Some of these Jedi wore uniforms of temple guards, with or without the masks, while others simply wore their robes. The Jedi as a whole were much better off because of it, and they showed it. Many of their uniforms glistened in the sun and shone in the darkness. They were the bringers of hope and justice to the galaxy, but their expansion didn't mean the Sith were gone. The Dark Lord of the Sith was still Sidious at this point, and he was still Chancellor Palpatine of the Galactic Republic, the corrupt state that fed off the Jedi success and upheld it as their own. The Order didn't challenge this because it wasn't their responsibility to make senators of the Republic give credit to the Jedi. Dooku still even fled the Order, but the reach of the Sith was much more influential. Despite Dooku being dragged into the pen of the Sith, Sidious's claws were slipping into temples and outposts across the galaxy. He had several Jedi operatives working for him in different ways. To many of these Jedi, he wasn't a Sith, and he wasn't Palpatine. Palpatine was able to find weaknesses in the Jedi system and exploit them by pulling on weak or confused Jedi, by showing them apparitions claiming to be real people. These pulls could expose more flaws within the Jedi, which would make them weak, but Palpatine knew that a simple clone war would not bring an order of such magnitude to its knees. Order 66 wouldn't either. Instead, he prepared for a plan, and Dooku was going to be instrumental for that plan. As a note on Dooku, he joined due to his confusion regarding the corruption of the galaxy. Sidious was able to convince the Jedi that his master was a piece of the Republic, because it had become increasingly noticeable how corrupt the Republic was, and the Jedi did not intervene. Dooku was convinced it was because of Yoda's fondness for the Republic, when in reality, it was because Yoda believed the Order and the Republic should stay separated. This didn't mean the Jedi didn't do missions for the Senate, which is where Dooku was kind of confused. He ended up leaving after Qui-Gon Jinn was killed anyways. Due to the sheer size of the Jedi Order, Qui-Gon wasn't the one who discovered Anakin. The Jedi Master that did was a Trandoshan Jedi named Usk, and he brought Skywalker to the temple on Coruscant. Palpatine never ever learned about this individual, and he never would. Anakin was under the protection of the High Council, and he was to be Yoda's official last student. Yoda had such vibrance. The key to his health was keeping his youth. He found great joy in instructing students, and Anakin was one of them. Even though Dooku left, he still found hope in the next generation. Due to most instructors teaching multiple Jedi, Anakin was trained alongside Barriss Offee and Ferrix Olin. Anakin was the star of the trio, but due to being raised from birth, he wasn't forced to endure slavery or see the atrocities of the Outer Rim, mostly because the Outer Rim had actually cleaned up. Anakin was a part of a Jedi Order that meant something to the people of the galaxy. Due to being students of the spiritual leader Yoda, the trio of Padawans would often get a chance to explore different locations and go on difficult missions. All of this aided their individual growth, but by the way that Yoda instructed these students, they found success in every turn. The model of training 2 or more students at once benefited young Jedi more than anyone else. Anakin was, of course, used to what he saw on Coruscant, but as per Yoda's regiment, he showed these students what it was like to be at an outpost in the Outer Rim, or at the monasteries of the Yavin system, or the Temple of Tython. The Order was remarkable, and Yoda believed these 3 Jedi to be the future leaders of the Order. Since Yoda had been the spiritual leader since the High Republic, there was no saying what would become of those to follow his rule. Truthfully, Yoda was hoping that one of these 3 students would be that spiritual leader. Initially, he hoped it to be Dooku, but considering he left the Order, that was no longer a chance. Skywalker, Offee, and Alin got along really well with each other, and as Yoda's students, they took a lot of the burden on themselves to exceed where Dooku failed. They believed they had a mandate to the Order, greater than that of their peers, not out of belief that they were better, but as a responsibility to make up or atone for Dooku's betrayal. As each of these 3 were Yoda's students, he believed them to be ready for the role of knighthood, and so on the day of their knighting, the galaxy split into 2. The CIS launched an attack on a free world, and thanks to Sidious' operatives inside a Jedi outpost, it was an attack that was foreseen by the Jedi, but quote-unquote neglected. This news was brought forward by the traitor Jedi, and therefore the Order itself looked like they were willing to let the CIS openly attack the Republic. While this didn't immediately ruin the reputation of the Jedi, rumors spread. It was true that a Jedi knew, but it was also true that this Jedi was an operative in favor of Dooku's regime. Sidious promised the individual a chance at serving under Dooku, but that would never be granted. The Jedi was to be expendable, and if they joined Dooku, then it would seem like a CIS thing rather than a Jedi thing. The Jedi would be bombed before ever reaching Serenno, dying as a cog in Sidious' plan for galactic domination. With the first strike of the Jedi already taken, Sidious awaited their next move. He had plans prepared for whatever they decided to do next. If they joined the Republic, CIS, or remained neutral, he was ready. Yoda was greatly disturbed by the rise of the separatist movement, but due to his social awareness, the spiritual leader called together the elders and grand masters from across the galaxy. The Jedi stood as a neutral entity. Outposts, especially near the Mid-Rim, were given orders to de-escalate any potential conflicts. Do not engage, do not agitate. If a member was seen doing either, remove them and send them to Coruscant under a guarded escort. Yoda and his wisest members would move from locations galaxy-wide to the original homeworld of the Jedi. It was secluded and it was operated by an ancient Jedi. Kirik Inflo was the man who stood atop the mountain of the Temple Island on Ahch-To. There were a few Jedi here with him. Most of them were Miralan Jedi, one of which being Master Luminar Unduli. These elders and Grand Masters gathered up with their spiritual leader at their original homeworld to make a decision on how to combat the rise of the war. Before they arrived, it was revealed that a clone army had been constructed and was being dispatched across the galaxy. 2 major facilities at Camino and Borovio were being used to pump out new troopers. Masters Adi Gallia and Imagundi were sent to each of these respective locations to investigate the source of these armies and why they were built. It wasn't known yet, but these armies were a request made by Jedi Master Sidious. Yoda and his allies gathered up, 150 of the wisest Jedi from the Order, and they meditated. They used the Force as their guide, and they tried to search for the resolution. The Jedi were in such harmony with the Force that they knew they could find the answers they were searching for through it. These elders would spend days searching for their answer, one that had the Jedi remaining neutral from the war, and one that would have their Order putting the end to the fights. It was a delicate procedure, but they could do it effectively. The Force gave them a guide to making the right decision. Yoda and the elders would have to return and put their plans into action, but it was too late. Sidious' Jedi operatives had already done their dirty work. Another one of the confused Jedi was given the incentive to make a move to stop the separatist takeover of a planet. The Jedi, in their respect, was trying to do something positive, and then they started a conflict with the droids. It was a CIS occupation, one without hostility, and the Jedi was given the directive of stepping a little too close to the takeover. What followed was a brawl between the Jedi and the droids. Blaster fire erupted over the square, and then the citizens were targeted. Sidious' hope was that the public would see this as a Jedi agitation, but it was seen in the wrong light. Well, it varied actually. Some people saw the Jedi as agitators, while others saw the Jedi as heroes for standing up to the oppressive forces of the droid army. It was a convoluted scenario, but it allowed Chancellor Palpatine to make a stance in the Republic, announcing that the Jedi were supporters of the Republic, and that he would officially like to request their aid in the Clone Wars. On paper, this didn't sound like a genius idea, but it was. Palpatine trapped the Jedi in an agreement they wanted no part in. If the Jedi joined him, then they'd be seen as the agitators they were, but if the Jedi rejected, then they would openly denounce the Republic and therefore lose all their respect for standing up for the little guy. The citizens of the Republic would see the Jedi as a net negative, rather than something that could help them win a war. The incentive now fell on the Jedi Council. They had to make a decision to become Jedi generals in this clone war or reject it, and hope the galaxy didn't turn on them. Dooku had followed Palpatine's bidding by making the Jedi look like allies to the Republic, because that was something he already believed they were. The CIS saw the Jedi as enemies, and if the Jedi turned the Republic against them, they'd be stuck in the middle of a war that loathed them, without the public backing of anyone aside from perhaps the systems in the Outer Rim. But not even that mattered. The Outer Rim still had a long way to go before it'd be officially recognized and respected by the core. Their only value to the Republic was what resources they could offer. When the spiritual leader returned from his trip to Ahch-To, he saw a galaxy in disarray, and saw propaganda shows on Coruscant from Palpatine to encourage the Jedi to support the Republic. The war was young, but the Republic was doubling down on their fight against the separatists. Yoda dispatched his 3 knights, Anakin, Barriss, and Ferris, to the Mid-Rim location near Raxus. It'd be the best place for them to go for the time being. He was very hopeful that they wouldn't agitate, and that they would help keep the Jedi's neutrality. Yoda then sent out a message encouraging this line of thought, but each of the elders and Grand Masters continued to prop it up, going to their closest outposts and temples to make sure Jedi avoided conflict. This wasn't their fight. At the same time, Adi Gallia and Ima-Gundi were returning to the temple on Coruscant to inform Yoda about the whole clone army issue. Yoda was speaking with Palpatine, who acted surprised and apologetic. He thought that the Jedi had joined his war effort. He never would have done such a heinous thing if he thought they weren't in support of them. This series of propaganda was targeted at convincing the Jedi to join. Palpatine knew his argument sounded weak, but he acted like he was out of the know. The propaganda, for example, wasn't his. It was done by the Senate, or the fact that everyone saw the Jedi fighting the battle droids and assumed they would be a part of the Republic war effort. Palpatine told Yoda that he didn't want to rush him into joining the Republic military effort, so he understood the hesitancy. But if there was anything he could do to convince him, he'd be right here. Yoda was so disheartened by this conversation. He spoke with political leaders maybe once a year, but never in depth like this. He was rattled. While he didn't have to take on the entire burden alone, he was blindsided by this. Yoda would learn of something far worse as well. The clone army was a Jedi creation, one done by the late Master Sidious. How could this happen? Why was this possible? Yoda didn't know why Sidious would do something like this, but it effectively put the Jedi into an even worse predicament. The creation of the clone army was not sanctioned by any of the numerous councils around the galaxy, but the public wouldn't care. People reacted to headlines, and very little of anything else. Naturally, people would read the headline that the Jedi were responsible for the clone army, and then see that the Jedi weren't fighting in a war that they seemingly premeditated. The Jedi councils made a move to stop the war altogether. The news regarding Master Sidious was unnerving, and they were sending groups of Jedi investigators to Felucia to see if they could find anything else. Maybe they missed something before. At the same time, the Jedi were going to just bring Dooku and Palpatine to a talking level. Grandmaster Mace Windu informed the Jedi that the Mandalore system was already offering up a neutral location to host such talks. Perhaps they could get Palpatine and Dooku there. As the Jedi were in these discussions, Dooku's CIS issued a statement, outright rejecting the Jedi and calling them a disease on the galaxy. He said that if the Jedi were spotted anywhere near separatist infantry or airspace, they and whoever they were around would be targeted and treated as insurrectionists and dealt with. This would be extended to civilians who were in the area as well. So if a Jedi was in the streets and the CIS landed, then they'd be seen as agitators and they would be put down. This caused a massive issue, because the Jedi were so widespread across the galaxy, everyday people were in immediate danger of being executed for being anywhere near the Jedi. This was terrible, and the councils knew they needed to act fast, but what was there to do? The Jedi couldn't target both governments and expect them to not turn against the Jedi. The Outer Rim supported their efforts, but that meant very little when it came to the rest of the galaxy because they pretty much rejected the Outer Rim. What could they do aside from join the Republic and try and win the war? Yoda spoke up over hologram, reminding each of the members what they had done to achieve this. Many of these Jedi hadn't seen the rapid change over the years, but he had. Yoda reminded them that their time as Knights of the Republic was successful because they trusted the Force and they trusted themselves. They worked as one unit, because the Jedi together were strong. He looked across the various holograms and told them that there would be losses, and the public might lose their respect for them, but the work of the Sith was meant to deter them from their path. He instructed them to stand tall, to learn why Sidious went to Camino, to catch those who wished to destroy them while they were caught off guard, and to be a light for those not ready to stand against the darkness. Some of the council members didn't understand, but Yoda knew that Sidious wouldn't prepare for everything, and he certainly wouldn't expect the Jedi to quote-unquote declare war on the Republic and the CIS. He knew Sidious wanted them to choose a side or neutrality, and this wasn't that. Yoda was iffy on the whole thing. He knew it would be costly, but they were Jedi. Their mandate was to maintain the balance in the Force and protect the people of the galaxy. If they chose a side, they would completely undermine their values, especially when the Republic was no longer what it once was. Once the transmission between the multiple masters was complete, Yoda contacted 3 of his newest students and gave them instructions. They were to find Dooku and capture him. He would deal with Palpatine himself. If Duchess Satine was going to give them room to find peace, then the Jedi would force it into action. Accompanying the Grand Master were a couple of Temple guards, and they were transported in a Palpatine-class corvette. Due to the sheer size of the Jedi Order, a couple more of them were made. Of course, Professor Hyang was in control of the legendary Crucible. Anakin, Barriss, and Ferris moved in a Jedi shuttle across the stars towards Serenno. They all looked to each other and spoke. Due to being raised from birth around each other and trained by the Grand Master together, they were more than ready for this encounter. Because Yoda had a sense of grief over losing Dooku, he trained these 3 to the best of his abilities. Anakin and Ferris were the older of the group, and Barriss was just a year younger. But they were all very talented with their lightsabers and with the Force. They spoke with each other. They were basically siblings at this point, and they asked how they each felt about the mission they were on. Did they think they were ready? All of them had a feeling of uncertainty, especially because Dooku was, well, him. But they reassured each other. Plus, they had a good way to get these uncanny feelings out of their system. When they dropped out of hyperspace, Anakin manned the ship's controls and launched the ship away from the separatist fighters and frigates. It was a very tight, narrow escape, but with Ferris and Barriss manning both the back and front cannons, they were able to avoid any deadly encounters. The group landed inside the forest of the planet before moving towards Dooku's reported location. Across the galaxy, Yoda was walking into the Chancellor's room with a number of Temple guards. The spiritual leader asked that Palpatine come with them, quietly, but they might have issues. Palpatine wanted to know what was going on, and all Yoda said is they were going to end this war together. If he didn't come, then he'd be escorted without his consent. Palpatine tried to get a hold of his Senate guards, but his communications were jammed, thanks to the Corvette outside the chamber. Palpatine would be quietly taken inside the Paladin, and they would depart from Coruscant. Sheev was very unhappy with this, but he started coming up with a plan to counter this Jedi maneuver. On the other side of the galaxy, Ferris ran to the front of the pack, and the Jedi stopped. The castle was in front of them. Truthfully, there was a level of curiosity they each had. Why would Yoda send them instead of a master? Perhaps he wanted to prove that these students were better than Dooku? The real reason was because no one was as close to him as they were, and the other Grand Masters and Elders were making sure their Jedi were in the right positions to succeed. So it really was up to them to get this done, especially because Yoda wanted this peace accord to happen immediately. If Satine was sponsoring and eager to sponsor, why not make the war end sooner? Barriss told the Jedi to keep in cover. A shuttle landed and out from it walked a dozen or so Magna Guards. The lead one informed Dooku that a Jedi shuttle escaped, and the Countess Serenno grinned, speaking aloud and telling the Jedi in the Force to come out, and they could negotiate their surrender. They looked to each other and came to the decision to walk out. It may have been unwise, but they needed to trust each other. Anakin, Barriss, and Ferris walked from the trees, each holding their lightsabers. Dooku told them that there was no need for hostility. Plus, how could they ever dislike him? They were all students of the spiritual leader Yoda. Yoda would be disappointed in them if they hurt him. Barriss spun her lightsaber and ignited it, telling Dooku that this conversation was over with. Dooku shrugged his shoulders, telling the Magna Guards to attack. Ferris and Anakin ignited their own blades and ran forward. Dooku wanted to see if this engagement was worth his time. The three Jedi threw themselves at the Magna Guards, working together as a trio. Their combined effort allowed Anakin to use the Force to crush most of them before they finished off the rest. Once they defeated the guards, Dooku lifted his crimson blade before his face and lunged across the courtyard. The Jedi dispersed, spreading out and using each of their individual forms to strike at the former Jedi. In transit to Mandalore, Sidious realized that he would never win this if he remained quietly in here. Dooku likely agreed to go with the Jedi, so Sidious decided he'd try and do something. If he could kill Yoda and the Temple Guards, he could blame everything on the Jedi. Dooku could quote-unquote break free, and he could capture the Chancellor, forcing the Republic to make a barter. It would completely destabilize the trust the public had for the Jedi. The plan was brilliant, and so Palpatine got up. He always carried his blade. Where? That's none of your concern. He asked the Temple Guard to unshackle him. He needed to use the restroom, and the guard did before having a lightsaber driven through his chest. Another guard ran forward before being cut down as well. Yoda was in a deep meditation when he felt the rise of darkness. He jolted up and he heard the lightsabers. The other Temple Guards moved to counter the Dark Lord of the Sith. Yoda ran across the floors of the ship and watched 3 Temple Guards get dispersed. Sidious must have assumed he could defeat the spiritual leader of the Order. Yoda sped forward and ignited his weapon, countering Sidious. Their blades toiled in an engagement of the agents. Yoda was defending the Temple Guards, knowing that despite their talent, they would struggle against the likes of Sidious. Yoda ducked under a strike made by Palpatine before kicking up and using Sidious's leg as a ledge to jump off of. He slashed Palpatine across the eye and leapt backwards, using the Force to launch Sidious into a wall. On Serenno, the 3 young knights continued to struggle with Dooku. This wasn't them outright losing, but they were struggling to get a hit in. He matched their energy well, but he was losing breath. He countered Skywalker and shoved him to the ground before shooting electricity at Barriss, throwing her from her feet, and then he grabbed Barriss by his wrists and spun him down to his knees before dragging his blade across his neck. The 2 Jedi turned over and looked at each other. Their hearts broke within seconds, and they got to their feet. Anakin and Barriss moved towards each other while keeping their focus solely on Dooku. He then told them that to resist the darkness was to encourage death. They had so much potential, and like their friend, it was wasted on the Jedi. Anakin spun his lightsaber and Barriss did too. They could do this. They ran forward, Barriss taking up point before sliding down and Anakin leapt over her head. The 2 of them were going high and low. Dooku threw his blade down and blocked Barriss' strike, and just enough of his blade defended him from Anakin. Barriss kicked the edge of Dooku's boot, bending his toes to a 90-degree angle, and using the momentum to shove herself off the ground. Dooku winced in pain as Skywalker landed and rolled behind him. Anakin then got to his feet and jabbed forward, but Dooku sidestepped and grabbed Anakin's wrist, dragging him forward towards his lightsaber. This was the end. Dooku shoved his blade towards Anakin before he realized his arm was no longer attached. Barriss struck him just in time to save Anakin, and Skywalker took Dooku's grip and spun his wrist around, so it almost seemed as if Dooku drove Anakin's lightsaber into his own stomach. Anakin and Barriss looked to each other as Dooku fell to the ground, surprised that they actually had done it, but their attention moved from each other to Ferris, who was decapitated on the ground. Poor child. He would have been a true inspiration to his peers. Barriss and Anakin got to their ship, placed Ferris into a capsule so that he could be buried, and they did the same with Dooku. They now had to leave Serenno and return to Coruscant. In hyperspace, Sidious worked as dedicatedly as he could. Yoda was a true challenge, but the approaching Temple Guards weren't. He used 2 lightsabers and slashed at the ground before kicking Yoda back. The Grand Master tumbled to the ground before watching 3 Temple Guards surround Sidious. One of these Jedi pulled a light whip and launched it at Sidious. The Sith Lord countered the 2 regular pikes, but the light whip was jarring. as he tried to stop it. The weapon lodged itself around his ankle and Yoda got to his feet, running at the Sith Lord. Palpatine dropped as Yoda launched himself. Sidious's face barely avoided being hit by Yoda's lightsaber, but the spiritual leader used the wall to propel himself forward into Sidious's back, driving his lightsaber out of his chest and landing on the ground in front of him. Yoda turned back, moving his blade into a stance before seeing that Palpatine had been defeated. As he was looking down, a communication came in from his students, one informing him that Dooku was killed, but his student Ferris had also died in the fighting. Yoda was obviously distraught by this and heartbroken, but no sacrifice, no victory. The Sith were seemingly gone, but the reality is, the spiritual leader wasn't sure. What he was sure of was what the Jedi needed to do to make sure this war didn't get out of hand. There'd be no reason to host the Mandalore Accords, and there'd be no surrender of either side. What resulted was a galaxy look at the Jedi for their involvement and the explanation of how everything came and went. While many people saw the actions of the Jedi as a result of an attempt to do good, the fact is, they killed two heads of state. Both governments were appalled initially, but without Dooku or Palpatine pushing either side into war, they had no real reason to continue it. The Jedi were still seen with a lack of favoritism, even though they were the heroes of the war. The Order didn't care though. Their fight was never one for reputation. Instead, it was one for justice. Yoda sent out more transmissions to his Jedi to help them handle this, because it became apparent that there were now protesters standing up and against the Jedi at their various outposts and temples. Even though it looked bad, the initial shock of Dooku and Palpatine's deaths would subside. The Order would persevere as it had before, and the Order would be responsible for suppressing acts of war by both sides. There were some clones who went out of their way to target the separatists, and the same went for some of the droids. In the middle of the conflict, there were the Jedi, the ones who fought and died by each other's side to defend the people from war. The Clone Wars would come to a conclusion with a peace accords, and individuals like Grievous and Asajj would face either destruction or exile at the hands of the Jedi. For the dozens of operatives Sidious was able to seduce, they were left lost. The voice in their heads no longer spoke to them, but one of the Jedi did leave the Order to go to Moraband to restart the Sith Order. The young Jedi was enamored with the promise of the Sith. However, in an effort to reduce the Sith religion to ash, the Jedi, as per the request of the spiritual leader, was to cleanse and destroy relics of the Sith across the galaxy. The birth of the war, the return of the Sith, and the near catastrophic effect it had on the galaxy had to be prevented from the source. The Jedi had become comfortable with coexisting with these relics of the past, and now it was time to eliminate them. Anakin and Barriss would be a part of these efforts, as the two of them would receive honorary promotions to the rank of Master. However, due to being Jedi at heart, they decided to reject these promotions, saying that they would like to earn the rank of Master through the instruction of another Jedi. As the Order spread out to rip down these havens of the Sith, Grandmaster Windu would locate the remaining enemy on Moraband. He would engage the young Sith, one who was so corrupted with the power of the dark side. Their duel would span the grounds of the ancient Sith homeworld. Windu and the Sith Acolyte would toil for victory, breaking through pillars and fighting with precision, but the darkness would never be enough to stop Master Windu of the Jedi Order. He eventually, through the thick of the combat, would prevail, cutting the last Sith down, and then shortly after burning the remnants of the Sith Temple and watching it crumble along with their religion. The Force was restored to balance, and the young generation, the one that faced the struggle of the war, were able to better themselves because of it. Yoda, 5 years after the war's end, would step down from the role of spiritual leader, believing it was time for another Jedi to take that mantle. He wanted his time as a Jedi to be one where he frequented the galaxy and visited outposts, temples, monasteries, and enclaves to see his order grow. During these visits, he'd be accompanied by Anakin, Ahsoka, Barriss, and Caleb Dume. Ahsoka and Caleb became knights before Yoda stepped down from the role of spiritual leader, meaning that Anakin and Barriss were masters. From there, it was the decision of the Jedi Elders to motion the Chosen One into the role of Grand Master, and from there, he was studied to become the spiritual leader. Barriss would also be given the incentive to join Anakin as a Grand Master, if Anakin ever wanted to become the spiritual leader after his training, but her decision was to follow Yoda. She preferred being around her former teacher, due to the tight bond she shared with him. As the rite of passage, the Jedi Elders would instruct Anakin how to become a spiritual leader. The Order as a collective wouldn't see too much change, but they would continue to expand. Eventually, Anakin would become that spiritual leader of the Order, and by the time he did, the Order added 5,000 new members. Yoda would be extremely prideful in his student. Barriss, inversely, would become the battle master of an outpost in the Outer Rim, the largest one out there. Yoda would live a full retirement, living another 150 years. It would be a bit painful because his last two students would pass away before he did, but their efforts would be instrumental in changing the Jedi Order, having two individuals as young as Anakin and Barriss holding important leadership positions redefined what the Order meant to the citizens of the galaxy. It was by the end of Anakin's life that the Jedi Order increased to 200,000 members, and the Order that once had a slightly tarnished reputation for defeating Dooku and Palpatine would be seen as the bringers of peace and harmony around the galaxy. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, INTJ Recluse, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliant Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Santa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calig, Youngley66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fordo's Legacy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, May 3 First Names, Darksaint46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash the like button, swim my legs, check out the Patreon, cool things on there. Special thanks to N-Sabers for sponsoring our 125,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. If you want to find out how you can win one of 6 lightsabers, check the pinned comment down below. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So, this was a bit of a trip. I know I had to spend a lot of time kind of setting it up, and I think that is very necessary to really explore how the Jedi Order operated. But I think the main difference and the most instrumental part of this video is how Yoda is changed by the Order and by his own decisions to not become complacent like he does in High Republic. And I thought that was a really cool way to diverge. And seeing a Jedi Order with so many members just feels so unnatural, but it's really cool and almost feels like they're more than just an order. It feels like they're an inspirational movement or something like that, because the galaxy is quadrillions and quadrillions of people, so having an order of 100,000 doesn't really seem so far-fetched, but it feels so large with the context of the order we have. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.